The knock on the door of Maya Whitfield's small Savannah office landed at exactly 9:14 in the morning, and two men in dark suits walked in like they owned the building. "Miss Whitfield." The taller one didn't sit. "Your father needs you at the house." Now. Maya didn't look up from her laptop. "I don't have a father." "He said you'd say that." The man set an envelope on her desk, thick, cream-colored, sealed with the Whitfield and Sons crest, the same crest that used to be stitched into her boarding school blazer before they scrubbed every photo of her out of the family archive. "He also said to tell you the company is dying, and only you can stop it." She laughed. One short, humorless breath. 5 years, and that's the message. "Not sorry. Not I was wrong. Just come save us. $400 million in frozen assets," the second man said quietly. "A hostile takeover vote in 11 days. 600 employees who don't know yet that they might lose everything by the end of the month." Maya's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. She had spent 5 years building Carter Strategy Group from a one-room consulting outfit into the sharpest turnaround firm on the Eastern Seaboard, precisely so no one from that house would ever need to matter to her again. And now here it was, the empire that threw her out, kneeling by proxy, sending strangers to beg on its behalf. "Give me the envelope," she said, "and get out of my office." The Whitfield estate outside Charleston hadn't changed. Same white columns, same security gate, same smell of magnolia curling off the drive. What had changed was the silence. 5 years ago this house was loud with staff, cousins, drivers running through the halls. Now it felt like a mausoleum with central air. Her mother, Denise Whitfield, opened the door herself. That alone told Maya how bad things had gotten. There should have been 3 people between her mother and a front door. "You came," Denise said, and her voice cracked on the second word. "I came to see how bad it is. Not to forgive anyone." Her father was in the study, thinner than she remembered, hunched over a stack of financial statements like a man trying to read his own eulogy. Richard Whitfield, son of a shipping magnate who'd built one of the Southeast's largest logistics empires after marrying a black schoolteacher his own family had once refused to receive at the dinner table, looked up at his daughter for the first time in 5 years and said nothing at all. It was her younger brother, Trevor, who broke the silence, striding in with the same golden boy swagger she remembered, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't spent Christmas alone in a rented apartment while photos of his engagement party trended on the Charleston Society pages. "Look who decided to remember she has a family," Trevor said. "Careful," Maya said. "I'm the only one in this room who can still tell the difference between an asset and a liability." Denise stepped between them before it could go further. "Please, sit. Let us explain." The explanation took 40 minutes and confirmed what Maya already suspected walking in. Whitfield and Sons was not just struggling. It was being eaten alive. A rival conglomerate, Callaway Holdings, had spent 18 months quietly buying up shares through shell companies, and now held enough combined voting power, with 2 other minority shareholders newly aligned against the family, to force a vote of no confidence against Richard at the annual shareholders meeting in 11 days. If it passed, the company would be restructured, sold in pieces, and 600 jobs would evaporate along with it. "Callaway wants the port terminals," her father said. "He's wanted them since the 90s. He is finally close enough to smell it. And the frozen assets." "An SEC compliance flag," Denise said. "Someone reported irregular fund transfers. $400 million, locked pending investigation, right when we need liquidity to fight the takeover." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Who reported it?" Silence. "Who?" she said again. "Reported it." Trevor looked at the floor, and in that half-second of averted eyes, Maya understood something she wasn't meant to understand yet. She should have walked out right there. Instead, she asked one question that changed everything. "What do you actually need from me?" Her father slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a shareholder registry, decades old, the kind of document that gathers dust in a vault until a crisis makes it relevant again. Highlighted in yellow was a name Maya hadn't thought about in years. Her late grandfather, David Whitfield, had structured a small, forgotten class of founder shares, non-transferable except by direct bloodline, carrying triple voting weight, and had willed a portion of them, quietly, to his first grandchild. Not to Trevor. To Maya. "You never told me," she said slowly. "We didn't know how to find you," her mother whispered. "We didn't think we deserved to." "You mean you didn't think you'd need me?" No one argued with that. Maya looked at the shares on the page. Enough, combined with the family's remaining stake, to tip the vote back in their favor if she agreed to cast them. Which meant the family hadn't sent for her out of guilt. They'd sent for her because, for the first time in 5 years, she was the only asset they had left that Calloway couldn't buy. She said yes. Not for them. She made that clear, standing in the doorway with her coat still on. She said yes for the 600 families who'd lose their income if Calloway won, for the longshoremen at the Savannah docks and the drivers running routes up to Charlotte, and the woman who ran the cafeteria at the port terminal that had fed 3 generations of Whitfield employees. Before she left the estate that first night, she drove to the Savannah terminal herself, unannounced, and found Miss Odessa still stacking chairs after the evening shift, the same cafeteria where Maya used to eat grits and shrimp as a child, while her grandfather inspected shipping manifests 2 floors up. Little Whitfield, Miss Odessa said, using the name only the terminal staff had ever called her, the one that had nothing to do with being anyone's daughter. They said you were never coming back to this place. I heard the company might not be here much longer either way. Miss Odessa's hands stilled on the chairs. My daughter's tuition. My son's rent. 40 other women in this kitchen alone, and that's before you count the loaders. She didn't ask Maya to fix it. She simply looked at her the way people look at someone they've decided to trust before they've been given a reason to. That look followed Maya back to the estate more than anything her father had said. She said yes because walking away clean had always been easier than staying and fixing something broken, and for once, she wanted to prove she could do the harder thing on her own terms. 11 days, she told her father. I run this the way I run every turnaround. No interference. No family sentiment. If I find rot, I cut it out, whoever it belongs to. Richard nodded once. He didn't know yet how literally she meant that. By midnight, Maya had commandeered the 14th floor conference room and torn through 5 years of financial filings with the same cold precision she used on every client who'd ever hired Carter Strategy Group. Within 3 hours, the story the family had told her began to fall apart. The SEC compliance flag wasn't random. It had been triggered by a series of transfers routed through a subsidiary, Whitfield Logistics Southeast, to an account in the Caymans, structured just cleverly enough to avoid immediate detection, but not cleverly enough to survive someone actually looking. Someone inside the company had been bleeding it dry for 2 years. And whoever it was had timed the final large transfer 3 weeks before Calloway's shares crossed the threshold needed to force a vote, as if they'd known exactly when the company would be weakest. Which meant this wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was a setup executed from inside the house. Maya didn't sleep. By 6 a.m., she had narrowed the transfers to assigning authority level only 4 people in the company possessed: her father, her mother, the CFO, and Trevor, who had been quietly promoted to deputy finance director 18 months ago, right around the time the transfers began. She stared at his name on the authorization log for a long time before she picked up her phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in 5 years for an entirely different reason. Her old college roommate, now a senior investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Nina, I need a favor, and I need it quiet. She confronted Trevor in the parking garage, not the boardroom, because she wanted to see his face without an audience to protect him. You've been moving money out through the Cayman shell, she said. 2 years of it. You want to explain, or should I let the SEC do it for you? For a moment his golden boy composure cracked completely, and underneath it was something she hadn't expected, not guilt, but fear. You don't understand what they had on me, he said. Who? Calloway's people. 2 years ago. I owed money, bad money, the kind you don't walk away from clean. They said they'd make it disappear if I gave them access. Just access. I didn't know it would turn into this. Maya felt something cold settle in her chest. So you sold the company to save yourself. I was going to fix it, Trevor said, and even he didn't sound like he believed it. Before the vote. I swear. You had 18 months to fix it. You used them to dig the hole deeper. She stepped closer. Does Dad know? Trevor's silence was the loudest answer he'd given all night. Don't go anywhere. The next reveal changes everything. Please like this video to help more people find it, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are yet to do that, because that keeps us motivated to get stories like this to you daily. She didn't tell her father that night. She needed proof first, not confessions extracted in a parking garage that Trevor could later deny. So she did what she'd trained herself to do for 5 years. She followed the money in silence, let Trevor believe he was still safe, and used the one advantage she had that Calloway didn't know existed yet: her grandfather's shares, sitting untouched in a vault, worth nothing on paper and everything in a boardroom. Her father led her down to the basement vault himself, a room she had only entered twice in her life, both times as a child holding her grandfather's hand. The walls still held the old photographs no one had thought to burn along with the rest of her existence. Her grandfather, David Whitfield, arriving in Savannah in the early 1970s to run a struggling family dock business. The schoolhouse on the edge of town, where he'd met a sharp young teacher named Ruth, who'd corrected his grammar twice before agreeing to marry him. The two of them standing outside their first rented warehouse. Him in an ill-fitting suit his own father had refused to lend. Him after the wedding, her in her Sunday best, both of them laughing at how little either family had wanted this to work. He used to say the company only survived because half this town refused to serve them at the same lunch counter, her father said. So they built their own instead. He pulled a small cedar box from a shelf, the kind of object that had clearly not been touched in years. Inside it sat the founder's share documents, alongside a yellowed newspaper clipping about the wedding no local paper had wanted to print. He left this for the first grandchild who reminded him of them both. Stubborn. From two worlds that weren't supposed to mix. Impossible to disown, even when we tried. You never told me, she said slowly. But the deeper she dug into the money trail, the stranger the timeline became. The Cayman transfers didn't start when Trevor said they had. They started 6 months earlier, right around the time Maya herself had been disowned. She sat with that fact until the coffee in front of her went cold. Before she went further, she needed someone who had watched this family for longer than she had lived, someone whose loyalty had never once been for sale. She found Walter, the family's driver for 31 years, polishing the old Lincoln in the garage the way he had every morning since before Maya was born. You came back, he said, not looking up from the hood. Temporarily. Nothing in this house is temporary, Maya. Not the good, not the bad. He straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth gone gray from decades of the same ritual. You want to ask me something? Ask. 5 years ago, the night they sent me away, you drove me to the airport. Did you know then what I was really being blamed for? Walter was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that told her he'd been carrying an answer for 5 years, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. I knew it wasn't true, he said. I heard your mother crying in that car the week before, on the phone with the lawyers. I didn't know the whole story, but I knew enough to know they were burying something, and burying you with it. Why didn't you tell me? Because a driver who repeats what he overhears doesn't stay a driver, he said simply. But I kept the date. March the 14th. Whatever paper you're looking for, check what happened in this house that week, not the week they told everyone. It was a small detail, offered without ceremony, and it would turn out to matter more than anything the lawyers had filed. 5 years ago, her parents had thrown her out of the family for what they called an unforgivable betrayal of the family name, a vague, humiliating accusation she'd never gotten a straight answer about, delivered by her father in front of 40 relatives at her own birthday dinner. She had always assumed it was punishment for refusing an arranged marriage to a Calloway cousin meant to broker peace between the two families. But the dates didn't line up with a broken engagement. They lined up with money. She found the second thread the next morning, buried in an old legal file her mother had kept, not destroyed, just hidden, in a drawer Denise clearly hoped no one would ever open again. It was a settlement agreement, 5 years old, involving a fraud claim against the company that had been quietly paid off to make it disappear. The claim named a whistleblower. The whistleblower's name had been redacted in the copy the lawyers filed, but the handwriting in the margin, correcting a typo, was unmistakably her mother's. Maya found Denise in the garden an hour later, and for the first time since she'd walked back into this house, she didn't ask a question. She simply held up the file. Denise's face went the color of the whitewashed porch behind her. You knew, Maya said. 5 years ago, you knew there was fraud in this company, and instead of exposing it, you paid it away and let everyone believe I was the one who'd done something shameful. Maya, tell me the truth. Just once. Tell me why. Denise sat down heavily on the garden bench, and the story came out of her in pieces, like something long swallowed finally forcing its way back up. 5 years ago, it hadn't been Trevor who'd first been caught moving money irregularly. It had been Richard himself, funneling funds to cover gambling debts he'd hidden from the family for a decade, debts that had grown large enough to threaten the entire company if the board found out. Denise had discovered it by accident, going through his study for tax documents. She had two choices: expose her husband and watch the family's reputation, the company, and 50 years of her father-in-law's legacy collapse overnight, or find another way. She chose the other way. She quietly arranged the settlement to bury the fraud claim before it reached the board, and when whispers started circulating that someone inside the family had been stealing, she let the story bend toward the most convenient shape: that it was Maya, the daughter who'd already embarrassed the family by refusing the Calloway marriage, who'd already been difficult, already been the one people were primed to believe capable of betrayal. "We didn't accuse you directly," Denise said, tears running freely now. "We just didn't correct what people assumed. It was easier. God forgive me, it was easier." Maya sat very still. 5 years of her life, the isolation, the shame, the nights she'd cried herself sick wondering what she'd done to deserve being erased from her own family, had been built on a lie her mother let stand because the truth was inconvenient. "Does Dad know you're telling me this?" "No." "Does he even remember what he did?" Denise's silence was answer enough. Maya walked back into the house and found her father exactly where she'd left him hours ago, hunched over the same financial statements, still performing the role of a man trying to save his company instead of a man who had nearly destroyed it twice. She placed the settlement file on his desk without a word. Richard looked at it for a long moment, and something in his face, the last of the proud, immovable patriarch, finally gave way. "I was going to tell you," he said. "Someday. You had 5 years. I was ashamed. So you let me carry it instead." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You disowned your own daughter to protect your own name. And then you called her back the second you needed that same name to survive." "Maya, please. I'm not here for an apology anymore," she said. "I'm here because 600 families don't deserve to lose their jobs for your sins or your sons. That's the only reason I'm still in this house." "You could have exposed all of us the moment you found that file," her father said. "Why didn't you?" "Because burning this house down doesn't undo what it did to me. It just leaves more people standing in the ash." She picked up the settlement file from his desk. "March the 14th. That's the week it actually happened, isn't it? Not the week you told the family." Her father's face changed, some last defense finally giving out. "How do you know that date?" "Someone in this house has always told me the truth eventually," she said. "It just took 5 years and a company on the edge of collapse to find them." Richard sank back into his chair, an old man suddenly, in a way he had not looked even that morning. "Your grandfather warned me once," he said quietly, "that a company built on silence eventually collects a debt it cannot pay in money." "He was right," Maya said. "You're paying it now? So am I." With 4 days left before the shareholders' vote, Maya now understood the full shape of the crisis, and it was worse than anyone in the family had admitted, even to themselves. Trevor's Cayman transfers had drained the company's liquidity exactly when it needed cash reserves to defend against Calloway's share buyouts. Her father's old, buried gambling debt had left a fragile balance sheet that any competent forensic accountant, like the ones Calloway had clearly hired, would eventually expose regardless of what Trevor did. And her mother's settlement, meant to protect the family, had left a paper trail that, if discovered by regulators mid-takeover, would hand Calloway exactly the ammunition he needed to paint the entire family as unfit to run a public company. 3 separate fires. 1 family. For days. And somewhere in Charleston, Preston Calloway was almost certainly counting down to the vote with a smile on his face, believing he'd already won. Maya intended to prove him wrong, but not by protecting her family's secrets. By using the truth as a weapon before Calloway could use it as one first. She called an emergency meeting with the board's independent directors, not her father's allies, the neutral members who hadn't yet been bought or cornered by Calloway, and laid out everything. The Cayman transfers, Trevor's coercion, her father's old debt, her mother's cover-up, all of it, holding nothing back. The room went dead silent. One of the older directors, a woman named Beverly who had sat on this board since before Maya was born, set down her pen very deliberately, as though the sound of it might otherwise be lost in the shock. "You understand," she said carefully, "that this information could sink the company faster than Calloway ever could. No, Maya said. What sinks a company is hiding rot until someone else finds it and controls the story. I'm choosing to tell it first, on our terms, with a plan attached, instead of letting Calloway's people leak it during the vote and destroy us with no defense ready. She slid a folder across the table. Full financial restitution for the drained funds, funded by liquidating a non-core asset. A warehouse complex outside Savannah her grandfather had bought decades ago, and no one had touched since. Trevor's immediate removal from any financial authority, with a formal restitution agreement instead of a criminal referral, contingent on full cooperation exposing exactly how Calloway's people had recruited him, and a public, transparent statement to shareholders, acknowledging the mismanagement under new leadership that would not include her father as CEO going forward. Beverly studied the folder for a long moment, then looked up, not at Maya, but at Richard. Your father built half his career sitting across from me at this table, Richard. I have watched this company since it was 3 warehouses and a promise. I want to hear you say, in front of this board, whether your daughter's assessment is accurate or whether she is exaggerating to seize control. Richard did not look at Maya. He looked at the folder, at the numbers he could no longer argue with, and said the only true thing left available to him. It is accurate. All of it. Beverly nodded slowly, as though that single admission had cost the family more credibility and bought them more than anything Maya herself could have said. Then perhaps, she said, the daughter you tried to erase is the only one in this room who never needed to lie to survive it. You're asking your own father to step down, she added, turning back to Maya. I'm asking him to survive, Maya said. Calloway's plan only works if the family looks weak and hidden. The moment we're transparent and restructured, his entire narrative collapses. He built a takeover on our secrets. I'm taking the secrets away from him. Richard did not take the restructuring plan well. You want to hand my own company to strangers, he said, using shares I gave you out of love, to remove me from the seat my father built with his hands. Your father built this company with integrity, Maya said. You almost destroyed it with a decade of hidden debt. I'm not removing you out of revenge. I'm removing you because the numbers say you have to go, and for once in this family, the numbers are going to win the argument instead of pride. And who runs it then? You. Maya hadn't planned to say it out loud yet, but the moment demanded it. Yes, me. Under an independent board, with real oversight, starting with the shareholders' vote in 4 days. The room went silent again, this time for a different reason. Trevor, still reeling from his own exposure, said quietly, she's the only one Calloway didn't corrupt. She's the only one with clean hands in this entire building. It was, Maya realized, the truest thing her brother had said in 5 years. The 2 remaining days before the vote were a blur of forensic accountants, lawyers, and late-night calls to Nina at the SEC, quietly building a case against Calloway's recruitment of Trevor that could be used, not to destroy Calloway publicly yet, but as leverage, in case he tried anything desperate before the shareholders' meeting. He tried something desperate. 3 nights before the vote, Calloway requested a private meeting, alone, at a restaurant on the waterfront with a view he clearly hoped might soften her. He ordered wine she didn't touch and slid a folder across the table before the appetizers arrived. $10 million, he said. Consulting fee. You walk away, let the vote happen naturally, and you never have to see this family's mess again. You've spent 5 years wanting nothing to do with them. I'm simply offering to make that permanent, on very generous terms. You want me to sell out 600 people who've never done anything to me, to protect a man who tried to destroy my family from the inside. Your family destroyed itself, Calloway said. I only noticed the cracks first. Maya closed the folder and slid it back across the table without opening her purse to take it. You noticed the cracks because you paid my brother to make them. That's not opportunity, Preston. That's sabotage with better tailoring. She stood, leaving her wine untouched. See you at the vote. It was 2 nights later, driving home from that same meeting's aftermath, that her car was run off the coastal highway access road by a black SUV that disappeared into traffic before her driver could even process what happened. No one was badly hurt, but the message was unmistakable. She stood on the roadside, glass from her shattered window at her feet, and felt something shift inside her, not fear, but clarity. He's panicking, she told Nina over the phone 20 minutes later, her voice steadier than her hands. A man that confident doesn't send a warning unless he's afraid of losing, or unless he wants you to back out before the vote. Then he picked the wrong daughter to disown. Nina met her within the hour at the Carter Strategy Group office instead of a police station, understanding without being told that anything official moving through the wrong channel could tip Calloway off before the subpoenas were even signed. She spread 3 years of transaction records across the same conference table Maya had once used to build turnaround plans for strangers' companies, and for the first time all week, Maya let herself feel the strange vertigo of fighting for a family she still wasn't sure she'd forgiven. If this holds up, Nina said, tapping the Cayman account trail, it's not just enough to clear your family's name. It's enough to end Calloway's career. I don't need his career ended, Maya said. I need him stopped before Friday. Sometimes those are the same thing. By dawn, Trevor arrived at the office unannounced, unshaven, looking like a man who had not slept since the parking garage. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked to record his statement before he lost the nerve to give it. I want it on record that I take responsibility, he told Nina, his voice unsteady but clear. Not because my sister threatened me, because I finally understand what I almost let happen to people who never did anything to me. Maya watched her brother speak plainly for the first time in years, and though the anger hadn't left her, something adjacent to it, grief, maybe, for the years they could have spent as allies instead of strangers under the same roof, settled quietly in its place. The morning of the shareholders' meeting, Maya walked into the downtown convention center wearing her grandfather's old company pin, the one Denise had kept in a drawer for 20 years, and took a seat not beside her father, but at the head of the family's delegation. The hall filled slowly with shareholders, journalists who had caught wind that something unusual was coming, and board members who had spent 18 months quietly deciding which side of this fight would still be standing by Friday. Maya recognized faces from her childhood among them. Men who had once called her grandfather Mr. Whitfield, with real respect, now watching his granddaughter the way people watch a house they aren't sure is on fire yet. Calloway arrived 20 minutes later with the confidence of a man who had already picked out which floor of the headquarters he planned to renovate first. He smiled at Richard the way a predator smiles at something already wounded. "Richard," he said, "I hope there are no hard feelings. Business is business." "Ask my daughter," Richard said. "She's running the business now." Calloway's smile faltered for the first time in 5 years. The vote began with Calloway's lawyers presenting their case: financial mismanagement, an unexplained SEC flag, a family too fractured and compromised to be trusted with public shareholder money. It was a strong case. It was meant to be devastating. Maya let them finish every word before she stood. "Everything counsel just described is true," she said, and the room stirred, because no one expects the defense to open with a confession. There was mismanagement. There were irregular transfers. There was a cover-up 5 years ago that should never have happened. "I'm not here to deny any of it." She let the silence stretch exactly long enough. "I'm here to tell you what Mr. Calloway's presentation conveniently left out, how he obtained that information, and how deep his involvement in creating this crisis actually goes." She played the recorded statement Trevor had given the SEC that morning, voice shaking but clear, describing exactly how Calloway's associates had cornered him 2 years earlier over gambling debts eerily similar to his own father's, coerced him into moving funds through a Cayman shell, and timed the final transfer specifically to weaken the company before Calloway's shares crossed the takeover threshold. The room that had been ready to convict the Whitfield family turned, in the space of 4 minutes, toward the man who had orchestrated their downfall from the shadows. "This is fabricated," Calloway said, standing so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Desperate. A dying family inventing conspiracies." "Then you won't mind," Maya said calmly. "The SEC reviewing the Cayman account records already subpoenaed this morning, which happened to show fund transfers from an entity registered to your holding company 3 weeks before your shares crossed the 20% threshold." She hadn't been bluffing. Nina had come through an hour before the meeting started. Calloway's lawyers went white. 2 of the previously neutral shareholders who'd aligned with him began quietly gathering their things. "I built this defense the same way you built your takeover," Maya said, looking directly at him now. "By finding the rot no one wanted to see. The difference is I'm cutting mine out in front of everyone. You hid yours behind a smile for 18 months. The vote, when it finally came, was not close. Callaway's coalition collapsed the moment the fraud allegations became public record, shareholders unwilling to risk being associated with an active SEC investigation. The no-confidence motion against Richard failed by a wide margin, not because the board trusted him, but because the restructuring plan Maya had presented, with her at the helm and her father formally stepping down as CEO in favor of an oversight role, gave them exactly the stability Callaway's chaos couldn't offer. Trevor was removed from all financial authority and would spend the coming months cooperating fully with investigators, his punishment softened by his testimony, but not erased. Richard would keep his seat on the board and his father's legacy intact, but never again hold the title that had let his hidden debts nearly sink 600 jobs. Denise resigned from her ceremonial board position the same day, unwilling to hold a title built partly on a lie she'd finally stopped protecting. And Maya Whitfield, the daughter who had walked into that building 11 days earlier only for 600 strangers' sake, walked out of it as chief executive of Whitfield and Sons. That evening, her father found her alone on the porch of the Charleston house, staring out at the water the way she used to as a girl, before any of this had happened to any of them. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly. "I'm not going to pretend the last 5 years didn't happen," Maya said. "You don't get to erase someone and then hand them a company and call it even. Then why did you save it?" She thought about the longshoremen at the docks, the cafeteria worker, the drivers running routes up to Charlotte who had no idea how close they'd come to losing everything over a family's pride. Because some things are worth saving even when the people who broke them don't deserve to be forgiven for it yet. Her father nodded slowly, understanding, perhaps for the first time, that his daughter had not come back to be his family again. She had come back to prove she never needed to be. 6 months later, Whitfield and Sons posted its strongest quarterly earnings in a decade, restructured, transparent, and run by a woman the shareholders had once been told to distrust on principle. The Savannah terminal expansion Maya greenlit in her first month as CEO broke ground ahead of schedule, and for the first time in years, the company hired instead of quietly letting contracts lapse. Callaway's holdings were liquidated under regulatory pressure over the following months, his empire dismantled piece by piece the same way he had once tried to dismantle hers, his reputation in Southeast business circles never fully recovering from the exposure. Trevor, stripped of authority but not of family, spent his mornings at a rehabilitation program the courts had ordered instead of prison, and some evenings, quietly, at his sister's office, trying, slowly, imperfectly, to become someone she might trust again. She didn't hand him his old title back, and she made no promises about when or whether she ever would. But she let him sit in on the terminal planning meetings, unpaid, unranked, simply present, the way a man earns his way back into a room he once nearly burned down. Denise visited the 14th floor headquarters every few weeks, never asking for her old position back, simply asking to be near the daughter she had once let the world blame for her own silence. At the Savannah terminal, Miss Odessa hung a small framed photo of Maya behind the cafeteria counter, next to one of the old patriarch, without asking anyone's permission. When a young loader once joked that the boss's daughter probably forgot where the terminal even was, Miss Odessa cut him off before he finished the sentence. "That one built her whole self back up from nothing after this family threw her away," she said. "Don't ever call her forgetful in my kitchen." Walter still drove the old Lincoln every morning, though these days it was Maya he waited for at the gate, not her father. Neither of them ever spoke again about the date he'd given her, but some mornings, when the drive was quiet, he would simply nod at her the way a man nods at a debt finally settled. Sometimes, late in the evening, the same two men who had first walked into her Savannah office 11 days into this ordeal now waited quietly outside her new 14th floor door, delivering reports instead of ultimatums, and she would think back to that morning. The cream envelope, the crest she'd hoped never to see again, the certainty that she owed this family nothing. She still believed that, in the parts of it that mattered, she had not come back for a father's approval or a mother's absolution. She had come back because 600 strangers deserved better than the family's silence, and had stayed long enough to discover that saving them and confronting her own history had, all along, been the same unavoidable task. She had inherited his shares. She had earned everything else. Please like, subscribe, and comment which part of the story hit you hardest. Stories like this drop daily on this channel, and we would be so happy to have you all on board.